The phone buzzed in Izzy Harper's hand, her screen lighting up with an unknown number. She let it ring twice before answering, keeping her voice steady. On the other end, a man she had never spoken to before, Owen Mitchell, her husband's supposed investment partner, launched into a furious tirade. Where is Nathan? He owes me money! A lot of money! And I know you have access to the accounts. Izzy feigned shock, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug as she forced out a confused, trembling, I don't understand. What do you mean? Owen scoffed. You really don't know? Nathan cleaned out your accounts and left? You better start figuring it out because someone needs to pay. Izzy swallowed hard, letting him believe she was just another clueless, devastated wife blindsided by betrayal. But what Owen didn't know was that she had been waiting for this moment. Just hours earlier, Izzy had woken up to an empty bed, the sheets cold beside her. It wasn't a surprise. Nathan had been distant for weeks. More business trips, more hushed phone calls, more late nights with flimsy excuses. Still, the final confirmation of her suspicions came in the form of a cruel, heartless note taped to the fridge. Goodbye. I never loved you anyway. The words should have devastated her. Maybe a year ago they would have. But Izzy wasn't a victim. She was a forensic data analyst who specialized in financial crime, and if Nathan thought he could outmaneuver her, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 months ago, she had noticed the signs. His sudden interest in their joint accounts, the way he quickly minimized browser tabs when she entered the room, the oddly defensive responses when she asked about his investments. She hadn't confronted him. Instead, she had started tracking every suspicious transaction, every transfer, every hidden offshore account. Nathan had no idea that while he was planning his perfect escape, Izzy was already one step ahead, securing her assets, documenting evidence, and working with a cybersecurity team to trace his every move. Now, as Owen continued ranting on the phone, Izzy allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Nathan thought he had pulled off the perfect con, but he was about to learn the hard way that his biggest mistake wasn't stealing from her. It was underestimating her. Izzy had spent years analyzing digital fraud, investment scams, and corporate embezzlement, so spotting the warning signs of financial deception was second nature to her. The irony? She never expected to see those same patterns in her own marriage. But 3 months ago, she started noticing the red flags. Small, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Nathan, a man who had always claimed to hate dealing with money, suddenly developed an interest in their finances. He began asking about their joint accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds, all under the guise of just making sure we're prepared for the future. It wasn't concern. It was reconnaissance. Izzy knew that when someone who has never cared about money suddenly starts asking questions, they aren't planning to build with you. They're planning to leave you. Then came the other classic signs of deception. Nathan's business trips became more frequent, always scheduled at the last minute. When Izzy checked his travel receipts, she found expensive dinners, high-end hotel stays, and transactions at luxury stores, none of which matched the itinerary he'd given her. At home, he was just as secretive. Whenever she entered the room, he would quickly close his laptop or switch browser tabs, as if afraid she might see something she shouldn't. And when she asked about it, you don't trust me? Why do you need to know everything? His defensive response was another red flag. Izzy had heard this same excuse from the fraud victims she worked with. Financial criminals always deflect, manipulate, and gaslight when pressed for details. It was the credit card statements that sealed the truth. Nathan thought he was being careful, funneling transactions through different accounts, but Izzy had access to more tools than the average person. She traced purchases to high-end jewelry stores, wire transfers to anonymous accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions that pointed to offshore holdings, jewelry she had never received. Transactions he couldn't explain, and when she started digging deeper, she found something even worse, a pattern. Nathan had always been vague about his past, brushing off questions about former jobs or colleagues with a charming smile. But as Izzy ran a deep financial background check, she found multiple names linked to fraud investigations. He had been married before, at least twice, and both times the women he left behind had been drained of everything they owned. Izzy knew she could have confronted him, demanded answers, screamed, cried, thrown things, but she wasn't impulsive. She was strategic. If she tipped her hand too soon, Nathan would simply disappear before she had enough evidence to take him down. So instead, she waited. She secured her savings, froze their joint accounts, and started compiling a case file. Every transaction, every secret account, every lie. Nathan thought he was meticulously covering his tracks, but he had no idea his own wife was tracking him the entire time. The pieces finally came together late one night when Izzy sat at her desk, staring at her screen, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and vindication. She had spent weeks following Nathan's digital footprint, uncovering a web of suspicious transactions, but this was bigger than she had ever imagined. Her best friend and fellow cybersecurity specialist, Mason Gray, had run a deep dive analysis into Nathan's financial activity, and what he found left no room for doubt. Easy. Mason's voice was tight with urgency as he sent over an encrypted file. Nathan isn't just a liar. He's a full-fledged financial predator. The report showed a trail of fake investment firms, shell companies, and offshore accounts all linked to Nathan under different aliases. He wasn't just a man planning to walk away with her money. He was a serial scammer, a professional con artist who had built an entire network of fraudulent investments to siphon money from victims across multiple states. And Izzy, she was just his latest mark. Her fingers clenched into fists as she read the details. At least 4 women before her, each of them successful, financially independent, and seemingly handpicked for their resources. Nathan had married them, gained access to their wealth, and then vanished, leaving them financially ruined. He never used the same name twice, and in each case, the pattern was eerily similar. Love bombing, trust building, eventual financial control, and then disappearance. And now she knew exactly how he had been planning to disappear this time. Izzy dug deeper into his most recent transactions. There it was. One large wire transfer flagged as an investment to a crypto exchange registered offshore. Another attempt to withdraw $250,000 from their joint savings. And then, the smoking gun, a flight booked under a different name, leaving for Argentina in 3 days. He had planned his exit perfectly, right down to the false identity he'd used to start over. But there was one thing he hadn't planned for. Izzy wasn't just another trusting wife. She was the worst possible person to scam. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was FBI agent Ava Sinclair, the financial crimes investigator she had contacted weeks ago when she first suspected something bigger. "We've been tracking him for years," Ava admitted, "but we never had enough to charge him. Until now. You've just given us the missing pieces." Izzy exhaled slowly, her grip tightening around her phone. Nathan had spent months thinking he was 10 steps ahead, carefully plotting his escape, but now he had no idea that the trap was closing around him. And this time, he wouldn't be disappearing. This time, she was making sure he paid for everything. Izzy didn't have to wait long for Nathan to make his next move. The text came late in the evening, just as she finished organizing the final pieces of evidence for the FBI. "Nathan, we need to talk. One last time." She stared at the message, unsurprised. This was part of his pattern. Every time he pulled a con, he reached out afterward, weaving a carefully crafted lie to manipulate his way into a final payday. Maybe he wanted more money. Maybe he wanted to test if she was still under his control. Either way, Izzy knew exactly how to respond. "Izzy, meet me at the Bayview Lounge tomorrow at 7. The FBI had warned her, "Play along, but don't let him know you're onto him." The Bayview Lounge, an upscale rooftop bar in downtown Chicago, would be the perfect place to lure him in. It was public, secure, and more importantly, already filled with undercover agents waiting to take him down. When Izzy arrived the next evening, Nathan was already there, sipping an old-fashioned like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked the part of a remorseful husband, hair slightly disheveled, a weary expression carefully painted onto his face, the same look he had probably used on every woman before her. "Izzy," he said as she sat down across from him, reaching for her hand. I know I messed up, but I can fix this. I just need a little help. She pulled her hand away, tilting her head. How much trouble are you really in, Nathan? For a moment, his mask slipped. His eyes lit up, just a flicker, as if he thought she was falling for it. 250,000, he admitted, lowering his voice. But I have a plan. If you just give me access to our emergency fund, I can fix everything. Izzy let him talk, pretending to consider it, watching him dig his own grave. Then, with deliberate calm, she slid a sealed folder across the table. The emergency fund? She echoed, her voice steady. You mean the one you tried to drain yesterday? Nathan barely had time to react before FBI agents closed in. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Izzy leaned back, exhaling. Game over, Nathan. Nathan's confident smirk vanished the moment the FBI agents hauled him out of his seat. The bar fell silent as curious onlookers turned to watch the spectacle unfold. Izzy remained still, her pulse steady as she observed the man who had tried to con her into oblivion, now handcuffed, powerless. He wasn't the mastermind he believed himself to be. He was just another fraudster who finally ran out of luck. As Nathan was escorted out, Agent Ava Sinclair approached Izzy, sliding a tablet across the table. You need to see this, she said, her voice edged with both satisfaction and gravity. Izzy tapped the screen, and the documents displayed a long list of victims, women just like her. Nathan had been running this same scam for over a decade. Fake investment firms, fabricated business ventures, stolen identities. It was all there, carefully cataloged by law enforcement. But there was something even worse. Nathan hadn't just been conning women, he had been orchestrating a massive cryptocurrency scam, luring investors into fraudulent digital funds and disappearing with their money. Several corporations had already filed lawsuits against his fake firms, but without enough evidence to convict him. Until now. Your evidence helped us link everything, Ava continued. We're talking millions of dollars in stolen assets across multiple states. Izzy exhaled slowly, gripping the table as she scrolled through the profiles of Nathan's previous victims. 4 women, each one financially independent, intelligent, successful. Each one had trusted him, and each one had lost everything. One of those names stood out. Claire Dalton, a New York-based hedge fund manager. Izzy had seen her face before in finance news articles. When Ava contacted Claire, she didn't hesitate. Within an hour, Claire and 2 other women joined a secure video call. Their stories were almost identical. Nathan had used different aliases, but the same strategy: build trust, access finances, disappear. I thought I was the only one, Claire admitted, shaking her head. I didn't come forward because I felt stupid. Izzy nodded. She understood that feeling. But she wasn't going to let him get away with it. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. A single text appeared on the screen. This isn't over. Watch your back. Izzy's stomach tightened. She forwarded the message to Ava immediately. It's from an encrypted account, Ava said, already making calls. We'll trace it, but I have a feeling we know exactly who's behind it. Izzy's eyes darkened. Nathan wasn't working alone. There were still players in his game, and they weren't finished yet. The night air in Chicago was thick with humidity as Izzy sat at her desk, scanning the latest updates from the FBI. Nathan was in federal custody, facing an airtight case built from months of investigations. His empire of lies was collapsing around him, and his network was beginning to crumble. But she knew better than to think this was over. The text message still lingered in the back of her mind. This isn't over. Watch your back. It wasn't an empty threat, it was a promise. At exactly 2:17 a.m., her phone buzzed with an intruder alert. The notification came from her home security system, motion detected inside her apartment. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she clicked on the security feed. The grainy night vision footage showed 2 figures moving through her living room. One of them was unmistakable: Lauren, Nathan's supposed sister, who had played the role of the concerned family member so well. The second was a masked man, tall and built like an enforcer. Izzy didn't panic. She had been prepared for this. She grabbed her backup phone and dialed Ava Sinclair directly. "They're inside," Izzy whispered, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Lauren and someone else." Ava's response was immediate. "We're already on it. Hold tight." Izzy watched the screen, pulse steady, as Lauren moved toward her office desk, frantically typing on her laptop. She was trying to wipe files, erase evidence. Izzy smirked. "Too bad for you, sweetheart. Every file is already backed up to an FBI server." Then the masked man turned toward the bedroom hallway. Izzy's breath slowed. They weren't just here for the files. They had assumed she would be home, and they were prepared to eliminate her as a problem. Before either intruder could react, flashing red and blue lights poured through the windows, followed by a loud, authoritative voice booming through a megaphone. "FBI, hands in the air, now!" Lauren froze, her hands still on the keyboard, as the masked man spun toward the front door. But it was too late. Agents swarmed the apartment, forcing them to the ground. Izzy exhaled as she listened to the familiar, satisfying sound of handcuffs clicking shut. She stepped outside moments later, her arms crossed, as she watched Lauren and her hired muscle being shoved into separate patrol cars. Ava approached her, phone in hand. "Guess what?" she said with a smirk. "Our team traced the threatening text you received earlier tonight. It was sent from Nathan's prison account. He was coordinating this attack from behind bars." Izzy let out a slow, steady breath. Of course he was. But now, Nathan's final card had been played. And just like before, he had lost. 2 months later, Izzy Harper sat in the front row of a packed federal courtroom, watching as Nathan Pierce, the man who had spent years defrauding women, corporations, and investors, finally faced his reckoning. Gone was the charming, smooth-talking con man who had once convinced her he was a loving husband. Instead, he sat stiffly in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists, his once confident demeanor replaced with a dull, vacant stare. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. For multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and attempted witness intimidation, the court hereby sentences Nathan Pierce to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. Beside her, Claire Dalton, one of Nathan's previous victims, squeezed Izzy's hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. Across the aisle, other women Nathan had scammed watched the sentencing unfold, no longer victims, but survivors. Nathan was escorted out of the courtroom, but before disappearing through the exit, his gaze flickered toward Izzy. That was his final mistake. She met his stare with a cold, unwavering expression, letting him know that not only had he lost, but he had never stood a chance. Outside the courthouse, FBI agent Ava Sinclair approached her with a knowing smile. "We could use someone like you on our cybercrime task force," she said. "Ever thought about switching careers?" Izzy laughed, the weight of the last few months finally lifting off her shoulders. She had spent years catching criminals from behind a screen, analyzing their patterns, uncovering their secrets. But this was different. This was personal. 6 months later, Izzy stood at a podium at a cybersecurity conference in Washington, D.C., presenting a case study titled The Anatomy of a Financial Predator. She was no longer just a fraud investigator. She was a consultant for the FBI, specializing in tracking high-level financial criminals. Nathan had spent his life stealing from women like her, but in the end, he had created his own downfall. She glanced at her phone, reading a message from Claire. Another victim came forward. "She's ready to fight back." Izzy smiled. Nathan Pierce had stolen from strong women his entire life. Yeah. He had unknowingly created a network of warriors dedicated to taking men like him down. The story of Izzy Harper teaches a powerful lesson about trust, deception, and resilience. It highlights how even the most intelligent and successful individuals can fall victim to manipulation. but what truly defines them is how they rise from betrayal. Izzy's journey shows that while fraudsters thrive on secrecy and emotional exploitation, knowledge and preparation are the ultimate weapons against deception. One of the biggest takeaways is that financial transparency is crucial in any relationship. Nathan was able to con multiple women because he relied on their trust and reluctance to question financial matters. Izzy, however, proves that paying attention to financial details, recognizing red flags, and trusting instincts can prevent fraud before it happens. Another key lesson is that justice is possible with perseverance and strategy. Instead of reacting emotionally, Izzy took control, gathered evidence, and turned the tables on her scammer. Her story also emphasizes the power of collective action. When victims come together, they can dismantle even the most sophisticated schemes. Ultimately, the ultimate betrayal reminds us that being deceived doesn't define a person, what they do afterward does. And sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's ensuring predators never get the chance to strike again.